My name is Evelyn Carter, and when I look back now, I can barely recognize the woman I used to be. At 30, I thought I had everything I wanted: beauty, success, and a new life far from the boy who once broke my heart. But life, as I would soon learn, has a cruel way of showing you what truly matters. James and I had once been inseparable, two dreamers in a small town, both believing love could conquer poverty. He worked as a mechanic, his hands always covered in grease, his smile as warm as the sun. I was the girl with big dreams and a stubborn heart, waiting tables at the only diner on Maple Street, counting tips and stars. We used to sit on the hood of his old pickup truck at night, watching the sky and talking about a future we couldn't afford. "Someday, Evie," he'd say, brushing a strand of hair from my face, "I'll give you the world. Not diamonds, not gold, just peace. A home, laughter, love that never leaves." And I'd smile, believing him with all my heart. But dreams are fragile things when hunger and bills come knocking. After my father fell sick, I worked double shifts. James tried to help, but his job at the garage barely paid enough. I grew restless, watching other girls marry rich men, posting pictures of vacations and silk dresses while I was still scrubbing dishes and smelling of coffee. When my father died, something inside me hardened. I started to believe that love without money was a trap. James proposed the following year, with a small silver ring he'd saved up for months to buy. He was so proud, trembling as he slipped it onto my finger under the streetlight. But I saw not the ring, only what it wasn't. "I can't do this, James," I had said, my voice breaking. He froze. "Can't do what?" "This life," I whispered. "Struggling, waiting, hoping. I want more." "You can't give me that." The hurt in his eyes was something I'll never forget. He said nothing. He just stepped back, nodded once, and left, quietly, like a man carrying the weight of a goodbye he didn't deserve. A month later, I moved to the city with a friend, found a job as a receptionist, and promised myself never to look back. But no matter how loud the city was, I could still hear his voice in my head, calm, forgiving, loving. I buried it under new clothes, new men, and new ambitions. Years passed. I built a career, surrounded myself with people who valued appearances. I dated a man named Richard, a wealthy businessman who adored attention and luxury. To my colleagues, he was the perfect catch, handsome, successful, and generous. To me, he was safety. Not love, but safety. When he proposed with a diamond ring twice the size of the one James had given me, the world clapped. I said yes, not because my heart whispered it, but because my pride did. One evening, while finalizing the guest list, I saw a name from the past that made my hand tremble: James Miller. He was still in town, I'd heard. Rumors said he'd never remarried after me. He'd stayed single, quiet, and poor, still fixing cars at that same small garage. A bitter part of me wanted him to see how far I'd come, the girl who once cried in his arms now marrying into wealth and status. "Invite him," I said impulsively to my friend. "Your ex?" "Evelyn, are you serious?" "Yes," I smiled coldly. "Let him see what he lost." When the invitation was sealed and mailed, something twisted in my chest, not guilt, but a strange ache. A part of me still wanted him to be proud of me, to see I'd made it. Weeks passed, and the wedding day arrived, golden and perfect. White roses lined the aisle, a live orchestra played softly, and guests whispered about how beautiful I looked in lace and pearls. But behind my smile, I felt hollow. As I stood before the mirror, I wondered whether James would even come. Maybe he'd ignore the invitation. Maybe he'd remember the way I'd humiliated him years ago and stay away. Yet a small, foolish voice inside whispered, "What if he does come?" When the ceremony began, I walked down the aisle with Richard waiting at the altar, his grin confident, proud, almost possessive. Cameras flashed, music swelled, and yet I felt nothing. Then, halfway through the ceremony, a soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward the grand doors. Outside, a gleaming black Rolls-Royce had just pulled up, elegant, majestic, and completely out of place in our quiet countryside church. the chauffeur stepped out first, then opened the rear door. And there he was. James. But not the man I remembered, not the boy with worn-out boots and oil-stained hands. He stepped out in a tailored suit, confident yet calm, his eyes kind but distant. And behind him, 3 children, triplets, no older than 4, 2 girls and a boy, dressed in soft white and blue. Gasps filled the air. "That's her ex," someone whispered. "He's rich now?" My bouquet trembled in my hands. My heart stopped. James met my eyes from across the church, not with anger, not with pride, but with understanding. He nodded politely, took a seat near the back with the children, and smiled gently, as if to say, "You look happy, Evelyn." But I wasn't. Not anymore. After the ceremony, curiosity buzzed through the crowd. "Evelyn, who was that man?" "He arrived in a Rolls-Royce." "Those children, are they his?" Richard laughed it off, but I saw the flicker of jealousy in his eyes. Later, I stepped out to the garden for air and saw James helping one of the little girls fix her ribbon. The golden light caught his face, older, wiser, beautiful. "James," I said softly. He turned, smiling. "Evelyn. Congratulations." "Thank you," I managed, trembling. "I didn't expect you to come." "You invited me," he said gently. It would have been rude to refuse. When one of the children called out "Daddy," the word hit me harder than I expected. "They're beautiful," I whispered. "Thank you," he replied. "They keep me alive." Silence hung between us. "James, I didn't mean to," he stopped me with a kind smile. "It's okay, Evelyn. You don't owe me an apology. We were young. You wanted more than I could give. I understand now." He turned to leave, his children calling after him. "Bye, pretty lady," one of them shouted. And as the Rolls-Royce pulled away, I saw in its reflection the woman I had become, beautiful but empty, rich but poor where it mattered most. That night, as fireworks lit the sky for my new marriage, my heart was elsewhere, sitting quietly in that black car beside 3 little miracles I'd never meet again. But life had other plans. Because that was not the last time I would see James Miller. The next morning, a knock came at my door, a letter slid beneath it. The handwriting was his. He wrote that when he received my invitation, it hurt, not because he wanted me back, but because it reminded him how deeply he had once loved me. He told me how he built his life from nothing, starting with that small garage that grew into a dealership, and then a company helping single parents own cars again. He said the triplets weren't his by blood, they were his late sister's children. He had adopted them because he couldn't bear to see them grow up without love. And then came the line that shattered me, "You once said love doesn't pay bills. You were right. But it builds homes, feeds souls, and heals hearts." By the time I finished reading, tears had blurred my vision. He didn't come to hurt me, he came to show me what love really means, forgiveness. That night, I sat alone by the window, still in my wedding dress, and realized I had married for everything except love. Days later, I found the small wooden box near the wedding altar. Inside was a single key and a note, for the woman who once dreamed of a home filled with laughter. I drove to the address that same day. It was the cottage we used to talk about, white walls, blue shutters, flowers blooming all around. Inside, photos of James and the triplets filled the space. On one wall hung our old photo, young and smiling, still believing in forever. I sank to the floor, sobbing, realizing what I had thrown away, not a poor man, but a rich soul. Years passed. I left my hollow marriage and began again, painting, teaching children, learning peace. Sometimes, I visited the cottage. James never remarried. We never spoke of love again. We didn't have to. Because love had already come full circle. One rainy afternoon, years later, I received another letter, from Grace, the little girl I once saw. She wrote that her father had fallen sick but was recovering. She said he often spoke of me, that love, he told her, was when someone still prays for you even when you're gone. She ended the letter with, "Please come visit us again." We planted new flowers, and I saved your favorite blue mug. I drove through the rain to the cottage. Grace ran to hug me, her curls damp, her smile bright. And there he was. James, older, softer, standing in the doorway. "Evelyn," he said, voice trembling, "you came." "I always do," I whispered. We drank tea from that old blue mug while Grace played nearby. The cottage glowed with warmth and forgiveness. As the evening sun poured through the window, James looked at me and said, "Maybe we were meant to lose each other, just to find the right version of love." I smiled through tears. Maybe we never lost anything. Maybe we just needed time to grow into the people we were meant to be. When I left that night, rain began to fall again. James handed me an umbrella, but I shook my head. "I like the rain," I said. "It feels like starting over." He smiled, that same, soft smile that once made the world feel safe. And as I walked down the path, my dress hem soaked, the air filled with the scent of rain and redemption. Behind me, the cottage lights glowed, a quiet reminder that some stories don't end. They simply come home. Please like and subscribe my channel.